Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Kelly. I am the Community Relations Program host at the Rochester Hills Public Library. Welcome to this evening's Author Talk program, The Audacity of Sara Grayson, with Joani Elliot. For tonight's program, we will leave time at the end for questions. After the presentation, the audience will remain muted throughout the program, so feel free to leave your questions in the chat, and I will ask them as a moderator during our Q&A portion. We would like to thank the Friends of the Rochester Hills Public Library for all of their wonderful support and fundraisers, which help us provide lots of great programs, such as the program you'll be enjoying tonight. The program itself will be recorded and will be available on the library's website about 1 week from tonight on the YouTube page, and later on, actually about the same time at rhpl.org. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Joani Elliot. Joani, please take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm so glad to be here with Rochester Hills Public Library. So I am the author of The Audacity of Sara Grayson, which is my debut novel. And I'm coming to you from just outside of Salt Lake City in Provo, Utah. And excited to tell you a little bit about my novel and a little bit about myself. I love a good cup of tea as I write, and I believe in the magic of stories and the power they have to connect us. And I have taught writing at the University of Maryland and Brigham Young University. And my husband and I are the parents of 2 daughters. And so I'm excited to be with you tonight. I like to learn a little bit about where I am speaking. And so even though I come to you virtually, I looked up a little bit about you all and where you are from. And we get great information. TripAdvisor. And so here's what I found out about you all in Rochester Hills. Do you all know what the #1 place or #1 things to do in Rochester Hills? So here's what I've got about you. So I don't know if Joe would guess. Joe, would you venture a guess on what the #1 thing to do is in Rochester Hills?
Let's see. Biking?
It was not #1, but there was a trail on there. So good guess. Yeah, and this is besides Target, because I'm sure Target is always, a #1 destination in any location. But okay, #1, they said Meadowbrook Hall. So is this just outside of? Is this just outside Rochester?
So Meadowbrook Hall is actually right around. It's pretty much on the campus of Oakland University. Which I actually graduated from and work at part-time. And it's, I believe, the theater program there, or it might also be there's also the amphitheater, which is a big stage. A lot of high schoolers graduate there, a lot of concerts there. So definitely a lot of stuff to do there.
#1, it's supposed to be fantastic. It says it's the historic home built by Matilda Dodge Wilson.
Yes,
and
that's the location I am thinking of.
Yeah.
So that there are theaters named after that, but there is actually an estate there.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah, and Meadowbrook Theater's on there too. Is that where you were thinking of?
Yes.
Well, yes, you're both on here. And anyway, Mo Tripper from Knoxville, Tennessee loves this place. #2 is the Paint Creek Trail. That's probably maybe biking, hiking. And then there's 3 is the Meadowbrook Theater. And #4, hold on to your seats, everyone. It's the Rochester Hills Public Library.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're right here. So this is very exciting. And your library looked beautiful, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
#4 on TripAdvisor. And then the Fieldstone Winery. Who knew? And I'm thinking, if I'm ever to write a murder mystery, all 5 of these places just seem like key. You got Meadowbrook Hall, the Paint Creek Trail, places for dead bodies, the theater, and then head to the winery afterwards. Anyway, I just think it's phenomenal. You've seen it right here. So Rochester Hills, great place to go. I think I need to put you on my list of places to go now that COVID is out of the way. So anyway, I want to tell you a little about my debut novel. It's called The Audacity of Sara Grayson. And here's—
Hey, Joani, could I interrupt for just a moment? I apologize. It seems like your mic is getting a lot of feedback.
My mic is getting feedback?
Yeah,
Okay.
so it sounds kind of off. Would you be able to potentially switch to a new mic source or check the connection? Because
I can check the connection.
Right about as you started going into your introduction, it just kind of started getting a little like weird sounding.
All right, let me see what I can do with that. Let me try if I switch this. Is it maybe when I was talking more loudly? Let me try.
No, it seems to be pretty constant.
Okay.
As you're speaking, for the most
part. I'm going to try doing this. Okay, how is that now?
Still getting the feedback.
Okay. Let's try. What if I switch to?
Try switching your mic source if you click on the pop-up box.
All right, I'm in the pop-up.
And just choose a different.
Okay. Okay, I just switched that one.
Okay, that is not getting the feedback.
That's better?
Yeah, that is better. Just
all right.
No, nothing bad. So.
Stop me if that gets worse again, and we'll adjust.
I will. Thank you for stepping in and taking care of that.
No, that's good. We want to be able to fix that so people can hear what's going on. All right, so let me tell you about this book. It's The Audacity of Sara Grayson.
Oh, I think you got muted.
Oh, yeah. The perils of live events. Here we go. Take two, take three. Here's The Audacity of Sara Grayson. And this is the book. I love it. You will actually get to hear about this book. This book centers around two questions. And it's what happens when the world's greatest literary icon dies before she finishes the final book in her best-selling series. And what happens when she leaves that book in the hands of her unstable, neurotic daughter who swears she is not a real writer. So that daughter is Sara Grayson. And Sarah's 32 years old. She lives alone with her dog Gatsby. Her husband just walked out on her with their pro double waffle maker and her last shred of confidence. She's really just barely hanging on to life. And 3 weeks after her mother dies, that's when she finds out that her mother has left, well, it's her mother's dying wish that she finished this last book in her best-selling series. And Sarah is horrified at the prospect. She can't imagine needing to finish this book. She doesn't even consider herself a real writer. She does teach some writing classes, but mainly she's been trying to start a new career as a greeting card writer. So you can see that she doesn't even, she can't even fathom doing something like this. So initially she says, there's no way I can do this. But through a series of some events, I'm not going to spoil it for you, she boldly takes it on, in a surprise even to herself. And so the book follows this journey, but stepping into her mother's shoes means stepping into some family secrets. And secrets she was never supposed to know about. And so I hope readers will love following Sarah's journey into this really big mess of a fun situation that she ends up in. And Sarah learns more about herself and about her family, and it's a whole lot of fun. And so that's the story of The Audacity of Sara Grayson. And one of the things that I'm asked a lot about is, where did I get the inspiration to write about Sara Grayson, this plot and these ideas? And so I want to tell you about just some of my background and how I ended up here. One thing is, I never set out to become a writer. And I don't have any great stories about me writing books as a kid or putting stories together. In fact, I hated writing. I did major in English, that is true. But it was in spite of the writing. I loved reading. Reading is really what I loved. And writing is just what I had, the price I had to pay. And so I became a middle school reading and English teacher, which actually has been ranked as one of the most dangerous, frightening jobs in America. And so I did that and went back to graduate school when I was 28 and took a fiction writing class on a whim and found out that I was actually pretty good at it, and I actually liked this kind of writing. And so that was kind of a revelation to me, and I liked it enough that I changed my emphasis in my master's program to creative writing. So I graduated with a degree in a master's in English with an emphasis in creative writing, and I wrote my first novel. Then I never published it, but it taught me a lot. But then life happens. I had 2 kids. I had a lot of other things going on, and I didn't really write a whole lot of fiction over the next 15 years or so. And so in 2015, I was teaching writing at the University of Maryland, and I finally hit this point where I thought, if I keep teaching writing instead of actually writing, I am never going to write this book and publish a novel. I will never reach this dream. A lot of my colleagues were great at multitasking. They were writing books at the same time, but I wasn't. And I finally said to my husband, I think I need to give myself a couple of years. I think I need to quit and try this. And this is a big move. It seemed kind of crazy because I loved my job. I loved teaching at the University of Maryland and loved my students. But it felt like kind of do this or don't do this. If this is what you really want, you need to go for it. And so my husband said, let's go for it. And my kids were on board, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And so that first semester, I was like, kind of, let's go for it. I'm going to do it. And I thought, it's going to be tough, but I can do this. And I saved like a big stack of student portfolios that my students hadn't picked up. We have to hang on to them for a certain amount of time before we can shred them. And I thought, I'll hang on to this because when it gets tough, I can look at that stack and think, would you rather be grading those? Because as much as I love teaching, I didn't love grading those papers. And let me tell you, the first week went so well that by Friday, I looked at that stack and I thought, yeah, I think maybe I would rather be grading those. That's how the first week went. Anyway, I have to tell you that first semester, I started and stopped and started and stopped a lot of different ideas. And the writing process went from bad to worse to terrible to agonizing. Nothing was working for me. And I thought, what have I done? I have left this job that I love. My writing is going nowhere. This is just horrible. And so one day I was feeling very sorry for myself. And I was just kind of pathetically in the bathroom crying about this whole predicament that I was in. And I thought, well, at least nobody cares if I write a book. It's not like anybody's waiting for my book. Most people didn't even know I was writing a book because I didn't tell them. I didn't want them to say, hey, Joani, how's your book going? So a lot of people just didn't even know. And so I thought, well, at least nobody knows. And then I thought, well, what would it be like if people were waiting? What if like thousands or millions of people were waiting for a book? And that's when I first imagined this sad sort of person with the weight of the world on her shoulders with all these thousands of people waiting for her to finish a book. And that's when I first imagined Sara Grayson. And so that's when she was born in my bathroom. It was a home birth there without medication. And I knew pretty quickly that it was her mother that had given her the book, that she wanted her to write it. And I knew that she was somebody who didn't want the book, who didn't want to have to do it. And that it would be really, really tough for her. But I'll tell you, as soon as I had Sara Grayson and as soon as I had that premise, the writing really shifted for me. I knew that was the book that I wanted to write, that was the story I wanted to tell. And that's when things started moving for me. Now, I will have to tell you this, that when things weren't going well for me, I was very distracted. I was organizing my pantries and cleaning out my garage and wandering the aisles of the Container Store. So I needed to actually focus and stop doing that and really get to work and focusing on my work. And so things needed to change, and they did. But it was a process. But after I started doing that, started learning how to be a more productive writer, things did begin to switch for me. And one of those things is that I had to really treat my writing like a job, show up and treat it like a job and protect my time like it was a job and not stop giving it away. And so my pantries are, and my house is much more disorganized. But the bookshelf I straightened up for you there. So you should all be very proud. Everybody take a look. Take a picture. That one looks good, but that's, yeah, I'm not going to show you anything else. Anyway, let me tell you one thing I get asked about with this book is the cover. And so I want to show you the cover and tell you just a little bit about it. My husband is a really great partner for me, and he's helps me with a lot of things book related and designing things. And so people ask me about this cover and how we came up with it. And so here's what the cover actually looks like, which honestly, I think this just feels like me about every day. That's how I start. This is how I start my morning. I think this is my yoga pose to begin with. I call it a yoga pose. Anyway, my husband was like, we need a really great cover. And we knew the designer at my publishing house would help us, but he's like, we need a good concept to come up with this. And Sara Grayson is just a person, she's just having a rough go of it. And so he came up with a concept. And so this is what my husband sent to the professional designer. And so that's my husband's work. So I just have to give props to my husband, because really you can see that the concept is really done by my husband. So Cody at Post Hill Press is the one that put all the professional finishing touches on it. But that was my husband's original concept. So I'm really grateful to him for that, because we got a lot of great comments on the cover. But also thanks to my daughter who posed for this. She's in college, and so my husband was making her pose for the photography so he could get this to work. So she's there with the book on her head and then posing right here. And then we were having trouble with Cody, so I even had to start posing for it myself. And so there I am, because there were things that they were making her look too like sculpted and perfect, and so I was having to say, no, her like hands have to be like this. She has to look more pathetic. And so this is me naturally. Pathetic comes to me very naturally, as you can see. So there I am right there. So, and then one of my fans sent me her picture after she'd read the book. She'd loved it, and she sent me this photo of her. So I'm hoping to get more photos of people reenacting Sara Grayson. So it makes me happy. So anyway, I like that. All right, Joe, how's my sound doing? Is the mic working out okay?
Yep, sounds good.
We're all right still? Okay, good. All right, so another question. I'll get a quick drink here. Always feels like my Marco Rubio moment whenever I drink. I don't know if y'all remember that from like 8 years ago. So another question I get asked a lot about is just the road to publication. How long did it take, and how did this whole thing work, especially for me as a debut author? I said I'd take a couple years off and try to get this book done. Well, it took me 3.5 years to write. That was a surprise. It took me a lot longer than I thought. Dang it. Apparently I can't rush the creative process. I have tried. And if you know how to make it go faster, please email me on my website and let me know what your secrets are, and I will employ them. I finished the book in the summer of July 2019. And I didn't have an editor or agent. And so for those of you who are less familiar with the process of trying to publish in adult contemporary fiction, you can't send your manuscript to any big publishing house. There are some smaller publishing houses where you can send your manuscript in, and the editors will look at it. But for most big publishing houses, you can't send your work there. Only an agent can send your work for you. So you have to find an agent to represent you, which means you've got to start querying agents. And querying is a letter that you send off to agents in which you pitch your work. And you send them usually the first 10 pages or the first chapter of your work. And if they like it, they might ask for the full manuscript or 50 more pages. And if they like it, they may sign you and become your agent and represent you, and then begin the process of trying to sell your work. Sometimes they might ask you to revise and resubmit. I mean, it's just long, arduous process. So I applied to and was accepted into something called the New York Pitch Conference. And so in September 2019, I went to New York City, and it felt like one of those, if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere moments. And I spent 3 or 4 days with the New York Pitch Conference, and that's an opportunity to pitch your work directly to New York editors and agents. And it was there that my now agent, she attended that, and I actually didn't get to pitch my work directly to her. She talked with our group, and she said that we could pitch our work to her, said they could query her with our first 50 pages. And the advantage of that is we could say, hey, we had met you at the pitch conference, and our work can kind of rise to the top. And so a week after I got back from the pitch conference, I pitched Jennifer Weiss, my agent. And the next day, her assistant said, can you send the rest of it? And it was amazing. That was a Monday. So Tuesday, she'd asked for the whole thing. By Wednesday, she had read it all and asked to represent me. So it was really a miraculous and exciting time. And I was so grateful to get to work with Jennifer Weiss. She had been an editor at St. Martin's Press for more than 30 years. And so she'd recently become an agent. So the opportunity to work with her was really thrilling. After that, it became a process of trying to sell my work. And that just can be long and difficult. You inevitably hit a lot of rejections and roadblocks, which we did. But by May, we finally got a yes with Post Hill Press, and they're a national publisher just outside of Nashville. And so anyway, so we sold it in May, and it came out a year later. So just a few weeks ago. And so anyway, always a long journey with that. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about, there's some different settings in the Audacity of Sara Grayson. She is from Bethesda, Maryland. And that's where I wrote the majority of the book. My family and I lived just outside of Washington, D.C. in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And that's where most of the book was written, and that's where Sara begins her journey. So a little bit here. The picture you see on the left is the McKeldin Library on the University of Maryland campus, and that's where I was teaching at the University of Maryland. And Sara Grayson is teaching freshman English at the University of Maryland, but she's terrible at it and she hates it. And I love teaching there. Although I had to write my colleagues and let them know, this is just Sara Grayson, it's not me. I really did love teaching there. And so I wanted to make sure that everything was cool. And anyway, these ladies on the right are my Maryland Writers Group, and they saw my book twice, critiqued it twice. They are the ladies that helped my book be in such good shape. So by the time I was pitching it to Jennifer Weiss, I think that's how they got me my agent. So anyway, these are amazing ladies. I call them my writing midwives. So the picture on the left is me in New York. That's just outside of the building where we had our the New York Pitch Conference. And the photo on the left are these ladies. I call them my writing sisters. And they were part of my group at the New York Pitch Conference. We were divided into group mainly by genre. So these are all adult fiction writers, memoirists, and they are just fantastic women. We are actually still, let's see, it's been nearly 2 years since we were together in New York.
And we were texting even today. We support each other and talk about our ups and downs. And so anyway, they're just wonderful writers and women. We're from all different parts of the country and writing all different kinds of things. But anyway, they're a great support to me in my writing journey. So some of the settings in Sara Grayson, one of the key settings is in Maine. And so Maine is just a really important part of my family. When we lived in Maryland, we would go up to Maine each summer, and I knew Sara Grayson needed to go to Maine. And so I'm not going to tell you what part of the book that ends up being a part of, but if you read Sara Grayson, you're going to go to Maine. So this is just me spending some time there. And on the right is a place called the Dance Floor on Baker Island, which is features in the book as well. These next couple of photos is me doing some research for the book. Sara Grayson was born in the East End of London. She's living, at the time the book opens up, in Bethesda, and that's where she has lived since she was maybe 8 or 9. But this is where she starts her life, and her father is British, her mother's American. And the East End of London, as I researched it, became such a magical place for me. And I'd been to London before, but I'd never been to the East End. And so I was writing all of these scenes and just hoping that I thought I've got to go there and see it for myself. But I told my husband, I'm worried I might get there and it might not be as wonderful as I've made it out to be in my research. And so I was so happy that about a year before I finished the final draft. I'd already finished one draft before I got there and did my research, but my in-person research. But I was so thrilled to find once I got out there that it was just as beautiful as I had hoped for. It's a much different part of London than the West End and Kensington and Hyde Park. For one thing, it just has the most incredible street art, and it's just a hub for a lot of artists, in fact. Anyway, it has a wonderful diversity, and the food is incredible. And anyway, it just has a lot of grit and resilience there. It has been through a lot, the East End of London. And so anyway, so this was some great research I was able to do there. All right, anyway, another question that I often get is, how does Sara Grayson's journey mirror my own? Because I'm writing about an author, trying to become an author myself. And so how does her journey mirror my own? I mean, we're obviously different people, Sara Grayson and I, but we shared a journey together as writers. And there definitely were some similarities. And I will tell you that her having to take on this writing journey was a great thing to share with her. I loved taking a deep dive back into the craft of writing fiction again. And it had been a while for me since I had written a book. And so I was taking this deep dive with her, and I was also just collecting all this, as much wisdom as I could about writing. And so one of those things that I did was I was collecting writing quotes along the way. And so each chapter begins with an epigraph, a piece of writing wisdom that begins each chapter. And I loved collecting those, and those mean a lot to me. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback about those. Now and again, I'll get a review where somebody's like, I don't know why those were there, but 98% of my readers appreciate the writing quotes. And I think they were there for me as much as they were for Sara Grayson, and being applicable to her journey and the placement of those. The poet Mary Oliver, she says this: the most regretful people on earth are those who felt the call to creative work, who felt their own creative power restive and uprising and gave to it neither power nor time. And I think ultimately in this book, it's about stepping up to the creative call. There is a quote I use just before the book begins, and it's by Joy Harjo, the National Poet Laureate. She's a brilliant poet.
and it's from her memoir. And she says, I could hear my abandoned dreams making a racket in my soul. And that is so Sara Grayson. She was a person who always had a story in her, and her mom knew it. And she needs to answer this creative call. And once she begins to do that, it's this process of becoming alive again. And it's my feeling as I went through this process of writing this book, that all of us have this yearning to create, whether we recognize it or not. I think there's this piece of us that needs to create. And what that looks like for each of us is entirely different. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to paint or draw or dance or write. What that looks like for all of us can be entirely different. And I think teaching is a very creative act. But I think when we answer that call, we live a much fuller, richer life. And so if there's anything I want my readers to take away from this book, it would be that that when we answer that call, we live a fuller, richer life. And I hope people can take some courage from Sara's journey in answering those calls. But it's interesting, I had a reader who told me after she read the book, she said, I don't consider myself a creative person. She said, in fact, I'm an athlete, but I still felt like the book gave me some courage to do hard things. So if that's in there too, then that's great. You know, and once we send our books out to the world, it really just becomes whatever the reader needs it to become. But I know that for me, it gave me creative courage. I realized that I had some abandoned dreams of my own that were making a racket in my soul. So I'm hoping that we all can listen to those and give them voice. And I think that's the power of story, really. The power of shared story is being able to do that together. So thank you, Rochester Hills, for having me today. And if anybody has any questions, or Joe, if you have any questions that you have, I'd love to answer those.
Absolutely. I've written a few questions down throughout your discussion here. And anyone in the chat, if you have any questions, feel free to type those in right now, and I will be sure to ask Joani. But while anyone's writing questions, if anyone has some, I will go ahead and ask a couple of the ones that I wrote down. And you may have answered. I'll try and shape these to not be redundant in anything you've already answered throughout your programming. So I note here, early you described how you'd started as a teacher and then later, put full-time effort into becoming an author. And seeing this novel being about an author and the Great Expectations, like you talked as well how your kind of experience as an author was, obviously something a lot of people ask about in development of the book. But I'm curious, how did your background as a teacher beforehand and that sort of coming later to the field of being a writer instead of, what some people might imagine is just like somebody like full force just doing it from the start. How do you think that manifested in your book and in the character you were writing?
Wow, that's a great question, Joe. I do think having started later, I heard somebody talk about life being a compost, and that all of our experience get mixed into this compost. And that sometimes when we are writing at an older age, we have a richer compost to work from. So I think writers who are writing younger and going full force, I think they're still writing from a rich compost. But I will say that I'm 48 now, and my experiences in teaching, and which I think give you a rich experience with just people in general. I think teaching and the experiences and the relationships you build add such rich soil to that compost, those experiences. But I've always liked that idea just of a compost. It just makes me feel like when you just have experienced more and more of life, I think you just have more and more to draw from. And I think that is one of the benefits and one of the joys of being a little bit older when you do write from that. Now, of course, being a little bit younger has its benefits too. You've got a lot more years to work on the craft and, more time to hone it and all of those things. But so pros and cons to that. But I have always liked that idea of having more to write from.
Absolutely. I think that individual perspective really kind of shines through in works. And I think it definitely gives it a voice of its own. Another element you talked about a lot in your presentation, and you talked about all these places that you lived, and even in your introduction, you gave us a lot of nice words of praise. But you talked about I always like to research where I'm going to be speaking. I'm curious if that fascination with different locales and different environments itself kind of contributed to the book, or maybe the tone of the book at all.
I sure hope that it did. And then that's a great observation, though, too, about place and what it means to us as individuals and to characters and to books. When I wrote this particular book, each setting, each place felt so important to me. And it's interesting, I had to cut a lot out of each place because I loved each place so much, and I ended up writing too much there. And Maine got the biggest of all. I mean, Maine got too long. But I think the places that we are from and that we're living are our environments are such a big part of who we are and what is happening, even if even when we're just stopping through. They're so key. And so I felt in this book they were a major part of the story, and I wanted them to be such. I think when they're not, it's an absolute missed opportunity, and I think the story loses something.
Absolutely, and this might sound a little more of a trite question than some of the other ones, but it just kind of comes to mind when you're talking about setting. Are you the type of author where the setting really comes to mind and you want to fit a story around that? Or does the setting, is that something for you that you develop afterwards, to fit a story that you've created?
That's a great question. For me, the characters and the plot came first. Although that would be interesting, if you just loved a place and just thought, I would love to set a story here. And I have been places where I've thought, or even just like a funky restaurant that I thought I got to have a character who works here in that. This is so wild. So I think it can come like that. But for me and in this book and in my next one, it's been, it's grown out of the character and what's happening first. But yeah, again, I've been to some places where I thought, oh, this would be great.
Oh yeah, you're just there and you're looking around and it just really gets your brain working. You're like, oh, I can imagine something here.
Yeah.
Definitely, I know the feeling. I have one more question here, and that is actually when you were talking about your writers group, and it seemed like this really nice and supportive group of people that you had. And I know often we have a tendency to have this kind of stereotype in our minds of the writer is kind of introverted, isolated. They kind of, they shut themselves in their room. They clack out a story. I'm curious if this way of communicating with a group of writers and having a kind of a support system around you and exchanging this kind of more social background when it came to that writing process changed how you approached writing the story, and if it maybe brought any kind of different tone or approach to the story that you were writing.
Oh yeah, another great question. I was about, I don't think how far along I was in the book, at least halfway through, I think, through the first draft when I started working with that writers group. And it transformed my book almost immediately because I I had just been alone in my room and I was just having my husband and my daughter read it. And that's just, your own family members, as great as they are, that's just this own little world. And once I got out of that and started meeting with these women, it's like all of a sudden you're getting real people who are outside of your cocoon saying, no, that doesn't make sense. No, he wouldn't do that. What? I was confused here. Oh, I like that part. And oh, this is good. And so all of a sudden when I'm writing, I've got this other audience in mind. I've got other people in mind. They're going to be reading this. This is going, so all of a sudden it just kind of transforms what you rightly described as a pretty solitary process. And then I've got this audience in mind, and they're going to be reading this. They're going to be responding to it. And so everything just transformed immediately. And they saw things that my husband didn't see, that my daughter didn't see, and that I could not see. And so it was just, everything shifted from there. And it also just they would just give me ideas, not necessarily saying this, you should do A, B, C, or D. It's just like, have you thought of it like this? And then I would be driving home and I'd be like, whoa, yeah, you're right. I don't even need a prologue. I don't even need to explain all of that. And I'd be like, this is amazing. So yeah. And then of course there's sometimes you're like, oh, it didn't work. They all hate it. You're like, I'm going to have to change that. They're right. But it's all how it goes.
Absolutely. I have a group of friends that I'm pretty close with, and we've recently started doing something like a short story prompt. So we'll just have like a prompt, and then we start writing a short story, like maybe a max of like 20 pages. And we're not necessarily, or at least I'm not pursuing writing in a professional manner. But I think the biggest boon I noticed when I started doing that is my biggest problem when it would come to writing anything would be just getting myself to do it. And having that sort of deadline really encouraged me to start doing it. Is there anything that you found writing for other people versus writing for your own sort of pursuits and creative ambition that really gave you a unique benefit that you're like, I couldn't have gotten this if I was doing it on my own? Like any other thing besides what you've mentioned?
Well, you hit on something powerful. I mean, having somebody waiting for you and a deadline, I mean, that's what you said is just so powerful. I think when we're just sort of moseying around and doing nice things on our own time, it doesn't work. I started making deadlines for myself, goals. I wanted to have this much done by this time. And then of course with my writing group, we were meeting every 2 weeks. And so I definitely had certain amounts of work that I wanted done by a certain time. I was gentle with myself. I wasn't like, you suck if you didn't get it done. I mean, it was all part of this process. I was doing the best that I could. For me, if I showed up and I worked hard at my computer and did the best that I could at that day, then that was fine. I would have a goal for a word count. And I think that's important. It helped me continue to move forward. But for me, the most important thing was that I met the resistance. And the resistance is what Stephen Pressfield calls, in The War of Art, he calls what all artists and what all of us face when we're trying to do anything that's really worthwhile and good in our lives, whether that's trying to get into shape or interviewing for a new job or writing a book or anything he says, you will meet the resistance. And he says for him, if you show up that day, he says, you put your ass where your heart is. And so for me, that's sitting here in my chair at my computer from the time that I said that I was going to do that and working hard. So I would have a word count goal, but as long as I met the resistance and I sat there, then I'm happy.
That's excellent. And do you think that sort of approach to writing and that kind of ability to just kind of enter the field is something that feels present in your book? Like, do you hope that I guess, do you hope that like somebody reading it might feel a little less terrified of the prospect of it, or that it maybe isn't as unreachable in their mind?
Oh, that's a good question. I hope they feel like it's a little more attainable. I mean, Sarah goes through a hard process. So I have had some readers say, man, was it like this for you? Or I never thought how hard it must be for writers sometimes. So I think on one hand, it is eye-opening for some people who hadn't really thought about how hard it might be. And then for other people, it's like, okay, yeah, it is hard. Thank you. That's validating because writing is challenging and you captured that. There's kind of some mixed responses. Responses are, I hope overall, I hope people feel like the hard things are attainable if we show up. Isabel Allende, the great writer, she said, show up, show up, show up, and then the muse shows up. So wonderful. Isn't that just about everything good though? I mean, I keep thinking that, anything worthwhile is a series of small moves. It's just those, it's like, how did you graduate from college? How did you graduate from any great thing is just like doing all the little steps. It's usually not any one grand thing. It's all the little stuff. So
I think that's wonderful. And I think the stories you've described it would really kind of give people a more concrete idea of what they might deal with. And it's the difference between the enemy you don't know and the enemy you kind of know. And that's a really great way to kind of introduce this very mysterious world to a lot of people. So I think that's wonderful. With that, I'm out of questions. And I don't have any more questions on deck here. So I think with that, I am happy to pass any final words off to you for the audience. Anything you'd like to say, or anything you'd like to say about the novel, maybe where people can pick it up if they're interested?
Right. Yeah. So my book, best place to find out more about my book is on my website, which is my name, Joani Elliot, Joani. And Elliot has 2 L's and 2 T's. So if you go to joanielliot.com, you can find more about my book there. And I'll have a lot of backstory about my book and also a lot of information for book clubs. And so if anybody wants to choose my book for their book club, I do virtual author visits, and I have a lot of great book club resources. So check out my website for that. And Joe, thank you for having me today. It's been such an enjoyable discussion with you, and just hello to everybody in Rochester Hills, and I appreciate the time tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful to hear about your story, and it's just fantastic to get these different perspectives and different stories. It sounds like a really pleasant human story that I think a lot of people could enjoy a lot more of after a year of interactions that have felt not as human as we're used to. So I think that's a nice thing that people can have to look forward to now. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you everyone who came out tonight. We really appreciate you being here, and I hope you all had a wonderful time. With that, I will go ahead and end this program for tonight. So thank you very much for joining us. You guys have a great night, and Joani, you have a great night as well.
Hi, everyone.